Up next, I'd like to invite, Thoric Cederstom. He is the staff lead for the U.S. Dry Bean Council for the Food Aid Committee, which is one of our highlighted points of conversation this year. We will hear from him, and we'll be following up his talk with a panel discussion centering around food aid. Food aid for North Harvest Bean is becoming a bigger part of our agenda all the time. So I think he'll share some information around what's going on at the national level. So here we are.
Greetings, everyone. Just checking to make sure I have connectivity and you can see my screen.
Yep, you're online now, so we're good to go.
All right, very good. I'm just trying to see how to get, okay. Very good. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to participate in your meetings. I was hoping to be there in person. Kevin Regan really talked up Fargo at this time of year, that the weather's great, and I would really miss being there. I'm still in Mexico after the winter board meetings of the U.S. Dry Bean Council, and I'm suffering with 80-degree temperatures and sunshine. So wish I could be there in Fargo with you. Some of you of the Northwest Bean Growers Associations were in Mexico and saw the presentation I did there, so I'm not going to repeat that one. I've done a little bit of a different one, and I applaud your association for being interested in food aid. It's a critical tool in the fight against global hunger, and it has achieved quite a lot. On one level, it seems like it's a simple sort of response to global hunger, because there's nearly 1 billion people in the world that are food insecure, meaning they don't get enough nutritious, affordable, and safe food to live active and healthy lives. And it seems sort of a simple equation to procure food in surplus areas, such as the United States, and ship it and feed those hungry people. However, it's a lot more complicated than that. And I thought I'd just spend some of my time in presentation just to give you a sense of the history of food aid from the United States and how it has evolved over time and where we are currently in the place of beans within the U.S. food aid package. So with that, I'll jump to the first slide. I hope these are coming through all right. I just wanted to do a brief history of U.S. food aid. It has over 100 years of history in the United States. And basically it stems from the fact that we are a surplus agricultural producer in the United States. We have very efficient production, thanks to many of the colleagues in the room today. You work hard, you apply your knowledge to growing different commodities, beans as one of them. And the United States has used that agricultural abundance to achieve many of its foreign policy goals and objectives throughout the world. Over time, though, the scope and the size and the focus of these efforts have changed, and they reflect the evolving priorities of the U.S. government and different administrations. In the past, humanitarian concerns have influenced those. However, since the 1990s, though, we've seen a shift from achieving foreign policy goals with food to really fine-tuning food aid to address humanitarian and development concerns. Quickly, the history of food aid, of food transfers from the United States to other countries starts post-World War I. And there the big concern was, the Bolshevik Revolution had just occurred in Russia and the formation of the Soviet Union. The United States was quite concerned about that. And so there was massive food transfers under the direction of former President Herbert Hoover. He came out of retirement and headed up that effort. It's a very interesting part of our history, which I'm trying to write up, and and disseminate, because it's a good example of food aid. Going to scale, post-World War II, food aid became an integrated part of U.S. foreign policy and diplomacy. Even during World War II, United States fed a good part of, we kept the United Kingdom afloat with food aid, and a lot of the Middle East also with the production from the United States. And post-World War II, that sort of food aid continued. Mid-40s, we started channeling that assistance through multilateral organizations, especially the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, known as FAO. Later, the UN World Food Program was split off from FAO to be more, to focus exclusively on food aid. And that currently is the biggest food aid delivery organization in the world, UN World Food Program. During the Cold War, food aid became even more important. It was during the Eisenhower administration that they signed the Agricultural Trade and Development and Assistance Act, creating Public Law 480, creating Food for Peace. It still exists today. That's where all the food aid is channeled through USAID, Agency for International Development, Food for Peace Office. The main goals there were both domestic, to agricultural surpluses that couldn't be absorbed by the domestic market or the international market. Food aid was used purposely for that, as well as for the humanitarian concerns. Under President Carter, though, he sought to decouple the sort of political and domestic economic interests of food aid and focus more on humanitarian response and not necessarily foreign policy concerns. 1985, we have the Food Security Act, and that kind of updated food aid to focus on countries that met specific criteria, meaning food insecurity criteria. Under George W. Bush, though, we have an important evolution here, where they pushed that 25% of Food for Peace resources go towards local and regional purchase. That's LRP. That was in the 2008 Farm Bill. They wanted to really emphasize the transition, emphasize food security and transitioning from food aid to food assistance. And food assistance is where food aid is used but embedded in other development activities, such as livelihood support, supporting local agriculture, helping people transition from a dependency on external food aid to providing for themselves. So graduating food deficit countries to food self-sufficient countries. But this push for local and regional purchase was not successful. There was a strong pushback by the NGOs and the commodity groups, as well as the shipping companies. However, fast forward another 6 years, in 2014, LRP did become a reality, and it is steadily increasing. More and more organizations and programs are shifting to local and regional purchase, and I'll speak more to that in just a second. Food aid is not without its critics. There's been, and a lot of those critiques are legitimate. There is some validity to that. And to talk about those critiques, I just want to distinguish between emergency response using in-kind food aid, that means commodities sourced from the United States, and efforts to address long-term food insecurity, which is chronic food insecurity. These are more development efforts that are trying to help countries lift themselves out of poverty. So there's two sort of buckets of food aid. One, emergency response, dealing with natural disaster, wars, things that disrupt the local food system and don't allow people to access nutritious and safe food. And then these longer-term chronic poverty issues, food aid has been used in the past. Emergency food aid, still very much supported and not criticized. Food aid for development purposes is where the struggle has been and the criticism has focused. Food is a resource transfer, meaning we're supplementing and subsidizing people that don't have food, and so we're transferring it from an abundant area to a deficit area. It is an awkward tool because it requires pipelines, it requires people, it requires accounting systems. It does come with a cost, a management cost to get it, get the pipeline from North Dakota, South Dakota, all the way to, all the way to the people in need in Yemen, for example. I mentioned that food aid is already emergency food aid well accepted. Some of the issues around long-term food assistance, the accusation of dependency, that we're creating dependency. This is not unlike critics of welfare and food stamps in the United States, a similar sort of critique. Certain amount of stigma for a country to receive food aid and not be self-sufficient, or a household or an individual also to receive food aid. It can disrupt markets if it's not done correctly. It also can undermine local agricultural production, again, if it's not done correctly. Sometimes the commodities in the past that were chosen to be supplied to vulnerable populations were not suitable to the local culture and ended up not being eaten and fed to chickens. There's all sorts of horrible stories about that. Sometimes the target beneficiaries really don't need food aid. They just did blanket distributions and a lot of people got food aid and they really didn't need it. And then there wasn't enough to go around to people that really did need it. There's been a lot of issues around leakage. These pipelines are long. They extend into areas that are quite fragile, and issues around transparency. There's also food loss itself, meaning food spoils along the way. We've had some experiences with that in Guatemala with shipments of black beans. So that's, hits home quite close to us. And then demonstrating the impact of food aid. So we're transferring all this food, and we in the past did not do a good job of documenting the nutritional impact, the benefit to the recipient populations. However, in response to those critiques and just the evolution of the industry, their food assistance has become more sophisticated. We're much better at targeting, identifying who should get the food and who shouldn't. The metrics are much better. I personally have done a lot of surveys, nutritional surveys, weighing and measuring children and doing other anthropometric measures to demonstrate that food aid is effective. We've gotten much better at doing market analysis to show that the commodities that are being transferred don't disrupt markets, will not undermine local agricultural production, and that will actually enhance it. And then finally, we've gotten much better at food logistics. I think the current loss leakage rate is less than 2%. That matches very closely to private sector commercial shipments and delivery of food. Just real quick, emergency food aid still receives a lot of support, a lot of funding. That's the biggest bucket. Food assistance, though, is also coming back online. This is the longer-term chronic because of the war in Ukraine. It's disrupted pipelines, food pipelines all around the world. A lot of the African countries, for example, are heavily dependent on wheat imports from the Eastern European region. And so now the humanitarian response community is reconsidering food aid as part of a larger food assistance, food security programming. Finally, I just want to note that school feeding is one of the few programs that still uses in-kind commodity donations from the U.S., and it's to address chronic food insecurity by keeping kids in school, keeping them well-nourished, so that through education, they have a pathway out of poverty. All right, some of the challenges for our industry of using U.S. dry beans in U.S. government food aid and food assistance programs. U.S. government-sponsored food programs are required when they design a program, submit a proposal to USAID or USDA, they have to offer the beneficiaries, the recipients, a nutritionally balanced food basket. And that includes protein, plant-based proteins, of which beans are an excellent example, lipids, some sort of oil, vitamin A, fortified soy oil is probably, vegetable oil is probably the most common, and then some sort of carbohydrates. It's got to be some sort of grain, maize, wheat flour. There's a whole list of carbohydrates that implementing organization can choose from. One of the biggest challenge, though, as the colleagues that on the Food Aid Committee at the U.S. Dry Bean Council knows, it's our price and availability vis-a-vis some of the other plant-based proteins that are available, specifically peas and lentils. In any given year, U.S. dry beans are usually more expensive and available in smaller quantities than other sources of plant-based proteins, especially yellow splits. So you'll see some graphics in the next slides or so where yellow splits are just out the roof, you know. And the humanitarian response organizations like them because they can feed a lot more people for the same amount of money, and the nutritional difference is minimal, right? So that's a real challenge for us. Those are our competing commodities in the food aid basket. Another challenge, especially in emergency response, is the cooking time and water usage that's required for dry beans. They usually take longer, and they usually require more water, which makes it difficult to use in emergency situations because oftentimes fuel and water are in short supply. And so addressing that is something that I've been grappling with, and I'll speak to it at the close of my comments. The other big challenge is that beans are usually valued at, people like them. There's no question about it. Culturally, they're very well accepted and preferred over some of the other pulses that are on the food aid commodity list, right? In a way, that's good, but in a way it's bad because what happens is sometimes when they are used in direct distribution, the recipients will sell them. They will monetize them, right? Because they can sell them for 3 times the price of locally available pulses, and then they turn around and buy the equivalent amount of pulses, and they still have money left over to do other things that they need, right? So that is an issue, and it has been a reason in the past that the World Food Program, WFP, has chosen not to order beans, you know, because they suspect that it is being monetized into the local market and not being consumed by the recipient household. All right, next slide. Let's see here. Here's just to give you a sense of our market share within the U.S. government procurement programs. I just want to note that the United States is by far the largest food aid donor in the world. We always have been, and we continue to be, and I don't see that changing in the near future. There is a role for direct food distribution, especially in emergency settings and in specialized circumstances for addressing chronic poverty. But you can see here that in 2022, just compared to us, the amount of metric tons of beans that were ordered was 2,830, lentils, 20,360, and then peas, 126,370 metric tons. Very, very big difference. Here you can see the procurement cost, although we're somewhat equivalent to lentils that fluctuated throughout the year. And at certain times, the price difference was significant, and I think accounts for the procurement differences. And then the average price for peas last year, too, as well, was significantly lower. Here's just a 3-year distribution. You'll see here on the left-hand side, these are orders for our commodities compared to lentils, and then just jumps off the page here, our colleagues in the dry pea industry. However, there's some good news. Been making some progress. I've been interfacing quite closely with a lot of the implementing organizations. These are nonprofit, non-governmental organizations that implement humanitarian response programs, as well as long-term livelihoods, food security programs to address chronic poverty. And so we do see some positive movements towards, this is the McGovern-Dole Food for Education program. This is one of the, as I mentioned before, one of the few areas where direct food aid is going towards these more chronic food security issues. And there we do see that a number of the programs did order beans. And one of my recommendations is that we engage with those implementing partners. We provide them with educational materials. And we also talk to them about post McGovern-Dole, how we can partner with local businesses in these recipient countries to position ourselves for the inevitable transition to local and regional purchase. Just real quick, who are the biggest implementers? Who are our clients that we need to court? The biggest one is UN World Food Program. Dave Weber, who's the chair of the International Food Aid Committee of the U.S. Dry Bean Council, and I, we went to Rome, we met with WFP, we got a lot of good information. We need to keep up that interface with them. They buy a lot of beans. Unfortunately, they don't buy a lot of U.S. beans. And there's a lot of political reasons for that we need to sort through and address and find a strategy for moving more of our beans into their procurement program. But according to their rules and regulations, they're required to put out international tenders. And unfortunately, oftentimes we're just not competitive with some of the other aggregators and vendors, especially our colleagues in Turkey. They're just very astute at sourcing beans from around the world and responding to the WFP tenders at a price it would be hard for any of our suppliers to meet. Of the U.S. NGOs, these are non-governmental organizations, Catholic Relief Services at the top of the list. Others are in a distant second place. Again, one of the trends is that direct food aid is kind of falling out of favor with a lot of the U.S. NGOs. They're switching to integrated food security programming, which includes livelihood supports, local procurements, and more than anything, cash distributions, right? They're giving people cash so that they can go out and procure, make their own decisions about what food they want to purchase and consume at home, and not be obligated to accept the food commodities that come from a donation program. There's also many smaller NGOs that are very committed to in-kind food transfers. However, they're not doing it at scale, but many of them are very loyal to beans. We met with quite a few of them in DC. They're very bean friendly. They like our commodity. They've used it in the past, and we are continuing to build and solidify relationships with this smaller portfolio of U.S. NGOs. So all clients are important to us. Moving forward, here's my vision for the coming year, and I think Northwest Bean Growers Association can be intimately involved in a lot of these activities. As I mentioned, continue to cultivate relationship with the primary food movers and learning to navigate the bureaucracy and the procurement program of WFP. CRS won 6 of the McGovern-Dole school feeding programs, so courting them and providing them with information about beans, how to prepare them, how to store them, how to different recipes that could maximize the nutritional impact of beans as part of a school feeding program. I think it will be critical. Also trying to secure a place at the table. There's couple of international school feeding forums that I think dry beans should be there as a representative of the private sector. Currently, it's all managed by government entities and multilateral organizations, and they're somewhat suspicious of the private sector. And unfortunately, our industry is lumped in with the Hershey's and Kellogg's and other groups that have done school feeding in a way that promotes self-promotion of their products, right? And from the implementing organizations' perspectives, they're somewhat leery of the private sector, and they lump us in together with these other private sector food companies. And so I'm trying to get them to disaggregate the private sector and see organizations like us as allies in school feeding, because our commodity is, straightforward and nutritious, right? Not processed, not changed in any way. It is really, truly a complement to any sort of school feeding program. We got several events coming up in Washington, D.C. Kevin has been there in the past, and I'm sure it would be great to have some other colleagues from the Northwest Bean Growers Association at some of these events that we're planning in D.C. We're trying to do a Bean Day, get people from Congress, get people from the implementing organizations there, learn all about beans and some of the innovations going on with new products that are being developed. We need to develop and disseminate educational materials. I've used a lot of stuff from the Northwest Bean Growers Association's website. You've got some excellent material on there, and I've downloaded it and reproduced it and distributed it to international organizations. This might be an area of collaboration where we could, a lot of it's though targeting US populations, perhaps a collaborative effort. We could develop materials specifically for an international audience. Make it relevant. It's what you have is relevant, but I think we could make it even more relevant. Another thing we're trying to do is what I've called the bean extravaganza. We're trying to bring implementing organizations to bean country, the United States. I participated in one 20 years ago in Michigan. I was already bean friendly, but for me, it was a great experience going around farms, seeing how beans are processed, Michigan State University, learning about all the research on beans. For me, it was great. I was on the demand side at that time, working with the international humanitarian organizations, and for me, it was a great experience. So we're trying to organize that too, to bring 12, 15 implementing partners to the U.S. to learn everything about beans and to listen to them too as well. What are their challenges? What would they like to see? How we could support them better? Another big issue, new product development in emergency food aid, this issue around cooking times, ready-to-eat foods, that's where the whole industry is moving. So I know Convoy of Hope is at your meeting there, and they have been a great partner for us in Guatemala. We're working on the development of a new product called frijol atol, which is a maize bean porridge, dry, that can be instantized. To use for supplemental feeding as children are weaned off the breast, exclusive breastfeeding to complementary feeding, and have an adequately nutritionally balanced food that's easy to prepare. Could be used for that, could be used for school feeding. I think there's a commercial market for it as well. And so we've been investing a lot of time and energy on that. Our partners, Convoy of Hope, we've got some donated commodity that we're going to get in the pipeline. Convoy of Hope is going to do us the favor of getting into Guatemala. The Institute for Nutrition in Central America and Panama is going to do the product development for us. It's moving along really well. I'm really excited about that. And I think it can be an alternative to corn soy blend, which is the product right now that has been used for the last 40 years. And there's a lot of pushback on it now from developing countries because of most of the maize and soy that comes from the United States is genetically modified. And so I think we have an opportunity to introduce a new product that uses dry beans and that fortunately are not genetically modified, and that could really fill a niche that is rapidly growing. I mentioned before the issue around cooking. I've been exploring ways to solicit input from land-grant universities that have ag engineering departments. I think we could, sponsor a competition among ag engineers to come up with a better mousetrap, a better way to cook beans that would reduce water and cooking requirements. I was at the ADEX conference in Brazil, which is the humanitarian conference. Everybody in the world, anything to do with food aid and humanitarian response were there, and there were some companies coming up with solar hot plates and pressure cookers. Really interesting space that I think would be good for us. And the last two items, one is political pathway. I think we need to have a conversation internally within the industry whether we can influence the USAID to include more in-kind commodity procurement. What they told us in WFP was, you know, when USAID gives us cash, we have free hand to go out and issue tenders in the international market, right? That money becomes ours and it's subject to our internal procurement requirements. However, they also get a big chunk of resources of in-kind donations from the United States. And I think we need to explore how do we get the US government to procure more beans and donate them to WFP, because they said we would take them if the United States will procure them and give them to us as an in-kind donation, right? But if they give us cash, then that cash goes into our system, and our system requires us to issue competitive tenders. And that's where US producers, providers are at a disadvantage vis-a-vis the global system. And then finally, on this local and regional purchase, I think we really have an opportunity to think ahead. And Kevin and members of the International Food Aid Committee of the U.S. Dry Bean Council, I think we should anticipate a international visit to one or two of the new McGovern-Dole programs that are ordering beans and get a sense of, you know, what are their needs? How are they working on the ground? It would not only feel good to go out and see our product being used to feed children in a school context, but to meet with businesses in those countries so that when the McGovern-Dole program switches from U.S. source commodities to local and regional purchase, we have developed business-to-business relationships so that moving forward, those businesses that bid on the LRP are already in partnership with us. So anyway, that's the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't go over time. I put some references here at the end if you're interested in reading more about how U.S. food aid is structured and a little bit about the history of it. It's here on the last slide, and open to entertain questions.
Well, thank you, Thoric, for that presentation. I guess I'll open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions for Thoric, we can get you a mic, or we can relay it to him. Are there any questions? Anyone? Well, Thoric, I don't see any questions, but again, thank you for your time and being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for producing such a high-quality food product. You know, I just want to reiterate that U.S. dry beans, U.S. food aid has really made a difference in the world and continues to make a difference in the world, and that your commodity plays an important part in that. Food aid is not an easy thing. It's not, you know, I laid out some of the issues here, but I think if we all work together, and I really sincerely thank Northwest Bean Growers for being proactive on this topic. And your members that are, you know, have gone to Washington and met with the different entities and willing to learn. I think, you know, it's a long journey, but we've got to start somewhere. We've definitely taken a big first step. And I thank you again.
Yes, thanks for being with us today again. Thank you. I think that we'll give him a round of applause and tell him thank you for being here.